Hello, and welcome back to the Argyle CFO Summit. My name is Brittany Sullivan with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speakers. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which includes complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our speakers, Matt McManus, Group Head of Finance at Kainos, and Brock Vaughters, Head of Operations Americas at Kainos. We're excited to have Matt and Brock with us for a thought leadership titled Practical Planning, Improve Forecasting and Modeling for Better Decision-Making. Welcome, Matt and Brock, and over to you.
Good day, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Brock, and we're going to try and answer the quiz question, how to improve forecasting and modeling for better decision-making. So we will do our best to give you a few hints and tips over the next 25 to 30 minutes. So next, please. Oh, sorry, this slide's fine. Thank you, Brittany. So brief introduction. I'll start first by introducing Kainos, who we are, and then I'll give you a little bit more of an introduction on my own personal role. So who are Kainos? So we are a FTSE listed IT service provider headquartered in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and we have about 3,000 colleagues today. And we're in roughly 22, 23 countries worldwide. In terms of what we do, we have three main lines of businesses. So our largest and our oldest line of business is our digital services business, which provides digital transformation services, cloud, AI, and other services into the public and commercial organizations, predominantly in the UK, but with an ever-growing base in Central Europe and indeed in North America. Secondly, we're very proud to be a Workday services partner and have been for over 10 years. We're the leading European partner, and in terms of global headcount, we're probably around 6th or 7th in the list. The last time I checked. We have over 1,000 Workday experts across those 23 countries we have a presence in. And our third line of business is our Workday products business. So we have developed a product suite of automated testing, compliance, and data privacy tools that can be applied to the Workday platform. And we're also known for our solutions in the Workday Extend platform space. So that's a little bit about Kainos. In terms of my own role, so I am the Group Head of Finance. I joined Kainos in 2016, just after we listed in 2015. And it's been a pretty amazing 7 years. So prior to joining Kainos, I qualified as an accountant with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I had a couple of other roles in American inbound companies based in Northern Ireland. And since joining Kainos, I've led the implementation of Workday Financials internally and Workday Adaptive Planning, which we'll talk on a little bit more today. And I have responsibility for the full finance function across the group, including tax, FP&A, treasury, payroll, everything else. With that, I'll pass over to Brock to introduce himself.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it, and I'll add my welcome to Matt's, and thanks everybody for being here, and looking forward to some of the questions at the end. So, as Matt said, my name is Brock Vaughters. I'm the head of operations for Americas for Workday practice here at Kainos. Joined Kainos about a year and a half ago, and came from a higher education industry. I was a CFO for a university here near Indianapolis, Indiana. Before that, I taught finance and statistics for a number of years, and then I won't bore you with all the details of the background, but they do vary from industry sales all the way to hard good distribution, technology, product, governmental accounting, so a number of different things. So I'm hoping to bring all of that background and experiences here to bear in the conversation, just to think through how do we actually plan and budget appropriately for the organization. So.
Thanks, Brock. And I guess for the audience benefit, while we both work for the same company, we both have very different perspectives on how we plan as an organization. So with my role sitting centrally, I'm more interested in how the structure of the structure and the process of our planning cycles work, and the sort of accuracy of the data and the messages coming out of it. From a group point of view, Brock would be more applied to one particular part of the business and would be much more hands-on in terms of the inputs, and then only the outputs that come out of that cycle as well. So hopefully we'll be able to balance the messages from both perspectives. Next slide, please, Brittany. So in terms of a bit of context here, this is I guess a sort of theme: change is the new normal. I don't think change was ever not normal, but I think the pace of change, certainly in the last few years, seems to have just stepped up a notch. Whether it's from COVID through to the war in Ukraine, through to inflation, through to banking crisis, it just seems to be pretty relentless and one thing after another recently. And I guess that's more the message here, that we just have to live in a world, an ever-changing world that's happening a lot quicker than it had been, in my personal opinion anyway, before 2020. And with that being said, I think planning has become ever more important. So in terms of how that manifested in Kainos, I touched earlier that we used we are a Workday Adaptive Planning customer, and that's our main source of truth for all planning activities. And we implemented it just before the first lockdown, pretty much 3 years ago, almost to the day. And from a business that was doing quarterly forecasting, or quarterly reforecasting, I should say, we quickly moved into what was effectively daily cash flow modeling. And can we survive? That was the initial planning cycle. Not that it ever transpired to be that way, and thankfully very quickly we realized actually this the COVID period would actually help us deliver to our customers actually in a better way remotely, and improve our things like our services utilization and ability to engage with people maybe based in parts of our company who couldn't travel necessarily. Suddenly we're able to work for pretty much any client that we have around the world. So it massively changed how we operated as a business, and then therefore massively changed how we had to plan as a business. And we were going into pretty regular scenario planning modes in terms of growth then, and what it meant for us going forward. That was really crucial. I mean, in my role, the business was looking at me quite regularly in terms of being able to get a feel or a sense for the numbers of what it might look like, in whether it's a short term or even a longer term, because as a listed company, we still have to make sure that we're guiding the market as best as we can and hit those numbers. So it was a very interesting 2020. I guess now we're back in what was acknowledging the changing dynamics out there. I think now we're back in a more structured cadence where we try to go back into quarterly forecasting, but at a lower level, having that ability to, I guess, flex models as and when is important. And I think we've got that balance right, where we have the group-wide processes at a quarterly basis, but the likes of Brock and Brock's teams can go in and analyze figures quite regularly. Brock, I don't know if you want to add any further. I know you joined probably just after the COVID phase.
We had our own change is the new normal kind of situation. Didn't have a nice tool like an Adaptive. We were living in Google Sheets and spreadsheets as a small organization, and definitely had to rethink the models for sure. But it really comes down to the core fundamental drivers for any period of time, right? What are those things that are going to change the business? And for us, it was the things you couldn't plan on, right? And how do you model those out? How do you model PPP loans and student tuition and all these other things in that industry, right? And it goes across the board from healthcare all the way through. Like how do you build a model to kind of say, short term, here's what we're seeing, is that going to continue? Here's what the trend could be. But I guess ultimately, like, it comes down to having the right tools to be able to quickly pivot and say, okay, what if this were to happen, and how could we show that, and what are the assumptions that we're making that are underlying it, right? And be able to quickly identify what those things are that are driving the business. So yeah, for us, prior to kind of coming to Kainos and really experience the ability to quickly adapt and to model things out was a challenge. So in the idea of business as usual, right? There's some cadence that exists there, but there's always nuances, right? There's always details that are ever changing there. So yeah.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think even if there were no external changes to our business, I think we would find a way to change internally, which is part of the fun of doing the job, I suppose. But always nice problems to have. Brittany, could you move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So really we wanted to try and give our perspective on how to avoid the most common planning pitfalls. So the first thing is embrace automation, okay? And I guess in terms of being agile and staying up with the business or being able to react quickly, the more you can automate, the quicker you can do that. So as an example, in Kainos, we're pretty much full platform in terms of being a Workday customer. So if you think of our business model as a services business, most of our costs are employee costs, maybe 3/4 of our costs. And we are now in a position where those costs are all contained in our Workday tenant. And with the click of a button, we're able to refresh those costs into our planning tool because it's also within Workday. And that's really important. So that gives us a very stable, instant foundation with 75% of our costs in the planning model straight away. Also, the model is set up in the same way to mirror the organizational structures that are in our HR module in the tenant and in our financials module. So there's that consistency right across the piece from HR to finance to planning and then to our PSA tenant as well within Workday. So it means that we're not sanitizing data or transforming data to be able to start a budget or a forecast cycle. And I think that's really important because once you start having to do that, I'm sure everyone on this call will be aware of it. That's when mistakes start to happen. And if you don't have that stable foundation before you start, you really are up against it straight away. So that's been very important for us in terms of avoiding those pitfalls, because I do remember what it was like before, and the world of Excel and version final. I laugh back thinking about it now because it's very easy to forget that. The next comment for me is really around simplification. So this is something I've been guilty of myself in terms of not taking this advice. So when we first deployed our adaptive planning instance, Workday and indeed other products out there are very good at doing what you ask it to do. The challenge is not to ask it to do things you don't need. So what I mean by that is avoid the temptation to overcomplicate. Is this assumption I want to build into a model going to drive something that we're going to actually influence business decisions with? Do we need to retain this KPI? Do we need to add this extra level of detail in? Because the system invariably will be able to do it, but will it end up clouding your judgment by producing just so much data and so much insight at the end of it that you forget what actually the core business drivers are for your organization? I think that's almost where we are now, 3 years later of being live. Is we've probably doubled in size in that period. We've completed 7 acquisitions as a company, and when you strip it right back, our business hasn't really changed, and we're still focused on those basic principles of utilization, rates, how we're interacting with our clients. And sometimes you can get lost in the noise and you can overcomplicate things. And I think that's just the real message here, is that resist the temptation to just overcomplicate at the start.
Yeah.
Brock, you want to add about the historical data point?
Yeah, this is again, I'm at the risk of being the individual who states the obvious. Your modeling is all going to be based upon, right, the data that you're supplying. So for me, as we literally just talked about all the things that have changed over the last 2 or 3 years, what are those things that are going to drive? The question becomes, is that going to repeat? Right? Is that going to be a one-off situation? Keep in mind, we know there's always going to be some sort of one-off situation that happens, an acquisition, right? That maybe that's how the business operates. For us, it's kind of a one-off, but I need to look at the data to make sure have I accounted for those things. Large deals that you might win, right? The likelihood of that happening, repeating every time, may not be the norm. And so really, it's about making sure, as I look at my data, I'm using it historical information. Does it make sense, and can I actually see this kind of play through the process? So, and again, we want to look at the data from the perspective of really the macro level environment. What are we seeing in the economic conditions? What's going to drive that? What's going to change? What's that looking like? And then kind of stepping down into our industry. What are we seeing for us? We're a Workday partner. I work on the Workday side of the business. What am I seeing within that industry, that ERP, that could shift or change or drive some of those changes? And the last one's really just kind of company specific. What are the things I know going on internally? Whether that's we're looking for more talent, we're struggling to do that. We're having issues with the right X, Y, and Z, you name it. So it's kind of looking at all the data from those perspectives, macro environment in my industry, and then at the company level, and then what's going to make sense to kind of in my assumptions of using historical data, but then how do I apply that kind of forward-looking piece of it? So confirming the data, but then making sure that we're making adjustments as we're looking forward is a key to make sure you've got that. You don't fall into the trap of, oh yeah, it's just going to repeat itself. Oh yeah, the same seasons are going to happen this year. We want to make sure we're applying a good deal of thought and understanding of why we're making those calls. So, makes sense.
Yeah, and interestingly on that point, Brock, I was on a session today with Workday themselves, and they were talking about machine learning and AI, I suppose, in the wider piece, and how it might be applied to adaptive. And they said that sort of using historical data to project future scenarios is something that they're hoping to roll out. So it's interesting, and it's even more relevant then of getting your historical data in good shape. Otherwise, your forecasts aren't going to make much sense. So, next slide, please, Brittany. Okay, the next topic is around how to improve forecasting with the great priorities and focus areas. So to me, this is about value creation. So I if you were to sum it up, I'd look at it through 3 lenses. So agility, in terms of to be able to react what the business needs and quickly. Efficiencies, then to drive costs out of the business. And lastly, about reporting. So to provide insights quickly in real time, if possible, to the business. So understanding your business drivers and stick stubbornly to those when building models and report. I touched on it earlier in the previous slide about focusing on what your key drivers are as a business. And if you're not able to easily A, input them into a model, and B, report on them when the reports are generated from that same model, I think you've missed the mark big time. Okay. And can you keep it down to those 4 or 5 key drivers? And we've been very guilty of this as we've grown as a company, especially if we've grown in new countries where we've maybe focused on, say, the cost of a colleague in a country versus another country. And you might be talking about 3 or 4 heads or, in those countries, and with 3,000 people across the company. Those sort of details, whilst accurate, don't actually change the business decisions that are going to come out of the models. So I think just be really stubborn about what exactly you're going to use the models for, and then work backwards in terms of what you put into it. Brock, you had the next 2 points.
Yeah, again, let me just stop and reiterate that the first one is really important here. Like,
I think we've lost Brock until he comes back. I'll keep it going. So he was just going to say that I was saying the right thing, which is always good. The next point about the key drivers, again, it's a similar sort of theme, but Brock's right in the business, and his drivers might be at a lower level, but more important to him than what I need to concern myself at a group level. So he will be looking at more granular things, that how can we improve our utilization as a business? What is impacting our utilization? Is it right through from sales forecasting and accuracy of that and likelihood of forecasts coming to bear, and then what the impact is, timing, things like that there. If a sale's going to close in one quarter versus the next, that has a huge impact on how we recruit. And if we don't recruit at the right times, we can't deliver for our clients. So that's about being really clear about what you want to get out of the model. And it can mean different things to different users whilst all within the same model. And the last point really is around validating the model. So once you've got those drivers in place, having those tests in place to make sure that your model is trustworthy. Now, what I would say is my experience of using Adaptive compared to Excel is that the sheer volume of checks, check tabs and then further tabs to check the check tabs, that just doesn't really exist anymore. There's the one-off setup, clearly, when you first go live with a sort of bolt-on product like Adaptive, but after that, you can really trust it. And that's the beauty of it, that, there's very few places where it can go wrong. There's no data migration as such. It's all learned in one place, and it's native to the product. Brock, I see you're back.
Good.
I see you're back.
It was good what I was saying.
Exactly. I think I did a good job. I'll pat myself on the back for it.
I don't think you missed a beat. I'll quickly add. That again, validating the models is exactly it. Right. We're really looking for not perfection here, right? 100%. Hey, we said this was going to happen, and 12 months later, sure enough, it happened. That's not at all what we're looking for. We're simply looking to reduce that measure, that error that we have, right? The variance that exists there. And so, apologize for dropping there, but fundamentally, that's it. We want to make sure that, does it actually sense check? Do we actually see this kind of playing through? And how can we quickly use technology to kind of do some of those things? Matt, you're saying all the things I used to live in, right? The check. This is check out. This is about, and all the things that kind of happen, versus just having a model in place that you can kind of build from. And again, then it allows you to really stop thinking, does the Excel formulas work, versus saying, how do I drive the business forward, right? What are those decisions I can create? Your time is spent really focusing on how to make sure that the model is working and telling me what is not perfect. And I think that's the expectation we as people in finance need to understand. Like I will guarantee I'll be wrong. That about the only thing I know is it won't be the number I said it was, but how close am I, right? That's really our measuring stick to validate the model with. So yeah, sorry for the technical difficulties, but
good old Zoom, eh?
Yeah, it's all good. Adapt and overcome.
Maybe it was user error, Brock, but sure, I'll not fill in too much.
appreciate the grace. Thank you. So.
Brittany, next slide, please. And this is the last slide. I do see lots of quite interesting questions coming through, so we'll touch on this quickly and try and leave 4 or 5 minutes at the end for questions. So, educating the business to build confidence and support FP&A efficiency. So, I mean, there's no point an FP&A team being siloed, building this wonderful model that's accurate and has so much information to it, and then it's just seen as dumping information across to the business, and they don't know what to do with it, or they're not engaged. So I think we've been pretty good at this in Kainos, I must say. So we got the stakeholders involved very early, and the way we went about that was, we knew there was a problem, which always helps, and we can solve it. Okay, so if there's a business need or an ask, you've kind of done half the battle. Secondarily, then we showed them what it could look like for them. Okay, so we started off by, teasing them with dashboards and reports and saying, if you can devote your own time and the time of your team into this project, you're going to get this out at the back end of it. And lastly, then we were able to show, or at least articulate, that the actual time involved in a regular cycle, whether it's a monthly, quarterly, or annual budget, is much less. So you're dangling that carrot and you're getting them involved, and I think that's huge. The training itself and the communication, you'll actually find, or we've actually found that using the system is very intuitive. It looks and feels a lot like Excel, which is hugely comforting for the super users, for want of a better term. And the reports coming out of the back end are, again, very well delivered in terms of within your Workday space, or within our Workday space, I should say. So getting those early wins are important. I think getting a model live quickly that you can iterate and grow with, rather than waiting for a perfect model, which will never exist. I think that's important. And just getting people on board by doing that. Brock, I don't know if you have anything else to add before we move on to the Q&A.
Yeah, I'll quickly just add, like, the key is that the leadership understands, like, this is our source of truth. This is what we're going to go from. This is where everyone buys into. So you hop on a call and someone's not using the system, or they're not using that information. They're the ones kind of outside looking in, versus saying, what's going on here. So it really is about finding, making sure that the team is the champions for it. And then, to me, coming new to Kainos, looking for training, like, I'm now seeking it out. It's not like anybody has to force it to me. It becomes something I want to make sure that I'm proficient in, understanding how to quickly do it. And then running our business. Just yesterday, we were talking about some of the changes. Our fiscal year started 25 days ago, and we're already going to be doing some new modeling to make sure, hey, this isn't working like we thought it was. How is it going to be, playing forward? And the system allows us to do that. So, and we're able to kind of explain that through. So.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll move to Q&A in no particular order. So does Kainos predominantly work with just Workday? Well, yes, in terms of as a customer. So we don't implement software for any other of the big vendors. We have our own digital services business, which builds bespoke digital solutions. But in terms of software implementation, yes, we're specific to Workday. How many business drivers, KPIs are too many? More than 10 to 12? I guess it depends on the organization. For me, less is more. I would be trying to bring it down to 5, 6, that sort of level per part of the business. Because 10 to 12 feels like a lot in terms of capturing attention. But I guess, like I said, it depends on the organization itself. Next one. How easy do you find it with your planning systems to ask key questions that perhaps hadn't earlier been anticipated? So if I've interpreted this correctly, is I like scenario planning in Workday, or sorry, in our model, which allows us to, we have our baseline projections, and then we think, well, maybe something we knew at the start and we want to model, or maybe something that's appeared throughout the modeling cycle. And you're able to pretty much file save as the model, in its process, and just change a couple of assumptions, and then your inbuilt reports already are able to pick up those two versions, compare them, and show you what the impact is. So we have used that for acquisition planning, for instance, or if there's big things like the great attrition, the great resignation, in terms of increasing our attrition. What would that mean? What would our backfill process look like? So I find that really useful, and it's very, very quick. I think maybe time for one more. How do you get buy-in to moving towards automation, especially those impacted by the change? So I've actually found no pushback in terms of automation. So this isn't like other parts of an ERP solution where you're maybe looking at taking people out of the business because of automation. So things like accounts payable or something like that, where maybe, might be an obvious example of something at risk. You find here that the FP&A colleagues are absolutely delighted with the automation, and they spend more time working with the business and adding value through business partnering, and less time panicking or in fear of the model not being, accurate or a big glaring hole in it. So we haven't found a problem in it ourselves. So that's probably an answer. Conscious that we're right up against it here, Brittany. Do we have any time left, or?
Yeah, you could go ahead, and I think we have time to answer at least 1 to 2 more questions.
Okay. Aren't many more companies moving towards rolling forecasts and placing less emphasis on the annual budget? Yes, I think that's a very valid comment, and I think that was raised just as I was talking about our own cycle. So I think getting the blend is perfect. So Brock's already talked that he might do his own for one part of the business his own budget that is on no particular cycle whatsoever, but he needs to reforecast it, right? But from a group point of view, in terms of setting targets, we still adopt annual budgeting. In terms of forecasting, which it gives us comfort around the information we're releasing externally to investors and analysts. We do it quarterly. It's getting that balance right, because you can perpetually budget or forecast, but what actually are you going to do with that information? What business decisions are you going to take? And that all depends on the organization you're either part of or working with. That will probably leave it at that. I think there's a few more. I'd just like to say it was an absolute pleasure to be invited to speak today. More than happy to share the slides afterwards, happy to share my own contact details. I'm sure Brock as well. So if anybody wants to contact me directly, more than happy to help in terms of giving a bit of advice or a bit more color around what Kainos do as an organization. So thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much, Matt and Brock, for such an insightful thought leadership. And thank you so much for addressing so many of the audience questions. I also want to thank everyone who joined us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be made available on demand following the event. Thank you guys again.